What if you woke up tomorrow in a prison cell? Not for a day, not for a year, but for nearly 4 decades, for a crime you didn't commit. How would you survive? Would you still believe in justice? Would you become bitter, angry, consumed by rage? For one man, this nightmare wasn't hypothetical. It was his life. For 38 years, he maintained his innocence while the world forgot about him. Until May 13th, 2025, when everything changed. The year was 1986. Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister. Top Gun was in cinemas. And in the small town of Bebington, near Liverpool, a 21-year-old florist named Diane Sindall was working extra shifts at a local pub to save money for her wedding. On August 1st, Diane finished her shift at the Wellington pub around 11:45 p.m. It was a warm summer night as she got into her blue florist van to drive home, but she wouldn't make it. Her van ran out of petrol in Birkenhead. With no mobile phones in those days, Diane began walking along Borough Road, a busy, well-lit street, presumably heading toward a petrol station. It was the last time anyone would see her alive. The next morning, a dog walker made a horrific discovery in an alleyway off Borough Road. Diane's body, partially clothed, showed signs of a brutal attack. She had suffered a fractured skull, facial lacerations, and injuries so severe that the pathologist would later testify they were the very worst he had ever seen outside of a road traffic accident. The murder sent shockwaves through the community. Women were afraid to walk alone. As former Liverpool Echo journalist John Thompson recalled, there was real terror because this murder was different. It was horrific. Someone was on the streets of Merseyside who was a real danger to women. Merseyside police launched what was described as the biggest manhunt the region had ever seen. They interviewed approximately 3,000 people. At one point, detectives were said to be considering interviewing every man in Birkenhead, but for weeks they appeared to have no solid leads. The day after Diane's murder, some of her clothes were found burning in a small fire on nearby Bidston Hill. A passing couple told police they saw a man running from the bushes, whom they recognized as Pete. However, and this detail would prove crucial later, they failed to identify him in a police lineup. The case was featured on the BBC's Crime Watch program, which included a reconstruction of Diane's final known movements. Following the broadcast, more witnesses came forward with descriptions that led police to focus on a local man, Peter Sullivan. Who was Peter Sullivan? At the time of Diane's murder, he was 29 years old. What we know now, but wasn't considered then, was that Sullivan had what psychologists would later describe as limited intellectual capacity and suggestibility, factors that would make him particularly vulnerable during police questioning. On September 23, 1986, nearly 2 months after the murder, Sullivan was arrested after giving officers several contradictory accounts of his movements on the night of the murder. During questioning on September 24th, Sullivan reportedly broke down in tears and confessed to the murder. However, he withdrew this confession later the same day, only to reinstate it shortly afterward. Here's where the case takes a troubling turn. Sullivan had not been given access to legal advice during this period. It had been withheld on the grounds that it would cause a hindrance to the inquiry. When Sullivan was finally granted access to a solicitor on September 25th, he retracted his confessions and told police he had made them up. Despite this retraction, the confessions were presented as evidence during his trial. In 1987, Peter Sullivan stood trial at Liverpool Crown Court. The prosecution's case rested primarily on 2 pieces of evidence. First, Sullivan's disputed confessions, obtained without legal representation and later retracted. Second, forensic evidence that claimed bite marks on Diane's body matched Sullivan's teeth, a form of evidence that has since been widely discredited in forensic science. When the jury returned their verdict, guilty, Sullivan stood silently in the dock. His mother broke down and screamed. His sister fainted and had to be revived. As the judge sentenced him to life imprisonment, tabloid newspapers were already preparing their headlines: The Beast of Birkenhead, the Mersey Ripper. Peter Sullivan was 30 years old. He would not taste freedom again until he was 68. For nearly 4 decades, Peter Sullivan woke up each day in a prison cell. As a convicted murderer of a young woman in a case that had shocked the nation, he was classified as a Category A prisoner, the highest security risk. But throughout his imprisonment, Sullivan maintained one thing consistently: his innocence. The path to exoneration was long and filled with disappointments. In 2008, 21 years after his conviction, the Criminal Cases Review Commission declined to refer Sullivan's case to the appeals court. They determined that scientific techniques at the time were unlikely to produce a DNA profile that could help his case. 11 years later, in 2019, Sullivan tried again, this time without the CCRC's help. The court turned down his bid in 2021. For many wrongfully convicted individuals, this would be the end of the road, but Sullivan refused to give up. Later in 2021, the CCRC took up the case again. This time, they were able to use new scientific techniques to analyze preserved evidence from the crime scene, techniques that simply didn't exist in the 1980s or even in 2008. The breakthrough came in 2024. DNA testing of sexual fluid found on Diane Sindall's body revealed a profile that did not match Peter Sullivan. Analysis showed the DNA came from someone known as Unknown Male 1, and experts testified it was 1 billion times more likely that the sample originated from Unknown Male 1 rather than someone else. Think about the implications of this for a moment. For 38 years, a man sat in prison while the actual perpetrator, the real Beast of Birkenhead, potentially walked free. Duncan Atkinson, representing the Crown Prosecution Service, told the court, "Had this DNA evidence been available at the time a decision was taken to prosecute, it is difficult to see how a decision to prosecute could have been made." On May 13, 2025, Peter Sullivan, now 68 years old, appeared via video link from Wakefield Prison for his appeal hearing at the Court of Appeal in London. Lord Justice Holroyd delivered the judgment that Sullivan had waited 38 years to hear. In the light of that evidence, it is impossible to regard the appellant's conviction as safe. Sullivan put his hand over his mouth and wept as the court ordered his freedom. His sister, Kim Smith, tearfully declared, "We've done it." Through his lawyer, Sarah Myatt, Sullivan made a statement that reveals much about his character after decades of wrongful imprisonment. "As God is my witness, it is said the truth shall take you free. It is unfortunate that it does not give a timescale as we advance towards resolving the wrongs done to me. I am not angry. I am not bitter. I am simply anxious to return to my loved ones and family, as I've got to make the most of what is left of the existence I am granted in this world. No anger, no bitterness, just a desire to make the most of what remains of his life." While Peter Sullivan adjusts to freedom, Merseyside police face a sobering reality. Diane Sindall's killer has never been caught. The investigation has been reopened, with Detective Chief Superintendent Karen Jondrell leading the effort. More than 260 men have been screened and eliminated from the investigation since it was reopened in 2023. The DNA does not match anyone in the national database. Police have ruled out Sindall's fiancé and members of her family. The National Crime Agency is now involved, helping officers proactively trying to identify the person the DNA profile belongs to. But after nearly 4 decades, the trail has grown cold. 2 families have been devastated by this case. The Sindall family lost their daughter in 1986 in a brutal murder. They believed for 38 years that her killer had been caught and punished. Now they face the painful reality that justice was never served, and her real killer may never be found. The Sullivan family lost their son, brother, and uncle to prison for 38 years. They maintained his innocence, fought for his freedom, and now face the challenge of helping him rebuild what remains of his life. Kim Smith, Sullivan's sister, captured this dual tragedy perfectly. "We lost Peter for 39 years, and at the end of the day, it's not just us. Peter hasn't won, and neither has the Sindall family. They've lost their daughter. They are not going to get her back. We've got Peter back, and now we've got to try and build a life around him again." In Birkenhead, fresh flowers and small notes are still left at a small black granite memorial to Diane Sindall close to the scene of the attack on Borough Road. The memorial states she was murdered because she was a woman. And somewhere, potentially, the actual killer has lived free for nearly 4 decades. Hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to press that like button and subscribe if you're not already. Stay safe and stay curious. See you on the next video.